Welcome, friends. Now, in the previous segment, we were talking about the ideas of Gramsci. Some people have said that the ideas of Gramsci were specific to Italy and therefore they were given in a particular context. And therefore, some scholars question the utility of these ideas and they question whether we could apply these ideas across time and space. Some scholars like Kenny and others have said that these ideas cannot be taken as trans-historical concepts. But if we were to look closely to these ideas of Gramsci, we can get a sense that Gramsci was actually trying to develop a broad-based conceptual framework. And one cannot claim that this framework is applicable to all situations, but it can certainly be applied to understand specific situations at different countries of the world. And it can definitely be applied to understand the operation of global capitalism in the present world. One scholar who introduced Gramsci to world politics was Robert Cox. He actually developed an alternative framework to understand international politics after he was inspired by the ideas of Gramsci. And he very famously argued that theory is something which is always for someone and for some purpose. Now, this is a very profound statement. Here he is trying to argue that whenever any theoretical framework is given, it is always given by someone or maybe a group of people. Now, when they are giving a theoretical framework, they have a certain purpose in mind. It could be advertent, it could even be inadvertent, but obviously they are not going to give a theory which is going against their own interest. They are trying to justify something. They are trying to demystify something. And that is the reason they are coming up with a theory. And they have a certain purpose also. So therefore, we should not treat any theory as value-free, as something which is truly scientific or absolutely, disconnected from the milieu, from the environment, from the place, from the country, from the society from where it is emanating. It has definitely some purpose. And finally, every theory or every idea benefits some people and goes against some people. Rather, most of the times it benefits some people at the cost of others. Now, that is a very tricky situation where a theory is benefiting some people at the cost of others. And usually, if you look at the operationalization of these ideas in international arena, you find that most of the time this is what happens. Even if that theory or that idea which you are talking about apparently is very naive, very innocent. But when that idea, that theory is applied in the political arena, it becomes, controversial in the sense that it goes to the advantage of some people at the cost of others. To give you an example, for example, when India was fighting the Britishers, in that struggle of independence, Gandhiji came up with some very useful ideas of non-violence and truth, satyagraha. Now, these ideas of Gandhiji were very, very nice, very innocent, very non-violent, apparently very non-aggressive, and nobody could question the utility of these ideas and the usefulness of these ideas and the innocence of its ideas if you dissociate these ideas from the context per se. They are very nice ideas. But the moment Gandhiji applied these ideas in the freedom movement, what happened? That these ideas worked to the great advantage of Indians like us and to the great discomfort of the British government. So if one were to ask the Britishers, how good those values are, they would say they are useless, they are the worst values we have come across. And for Indians, they were the best. So therefore, any idea cannot be absolutely good or absolutely bad. It depends, on where they are being applied and who has actually created those ideas, who has conceptualized that idea. Like, for example, in the previous session, we were talking about the Washington Consensus. Now, what does these two terms mean? Washington, of course, you all know, is the capital of the United States of America, and consensus means agreement. So the assumption is that this is an idea which is emerging from Washington and there is consensus on this idea. But if we conform to that Washington consensus, what happens? We are agreeing to a model of economic growth which has been developed in America by Americans and in their interest. And it is a part of that idea that if some country of the world is going to adopt that particular idea, it is not going to work against the interest of America. Rather, in most cases, that would be working in the interest of America. So that is something, which is there, which lies behind every theory, every idea, every prescription in politics. So if you scratch the surface, you find the reality, and that is what Robert Cox is asking us to do. So he argues that if all ideas and values are actually a reflection of a particular set of social relations and are transformed, and as they are transformed, they transform the social relations in the society. So, for example, in any society, there are a set of social relations and they are underpinned by certain values and ideas. So, if those values and ideas change with time, the social relations are bound to be affected. And therefore, all knowledge of the world, according to Robert Cox, reflects a certain context. So therefore, knowledge, in other words, is not objective and timeless, as some theorists, especially the realists, would like us to believe. So knowledge has also certain purpose. Knowledge is not for knowledge's sake. Someone somewhere has created that knowledge, and it is eventually at the operational level going to serve the interest of some at the cost of other. So therefore, there cannot be a simple separation between facts and values as we are given to doing all the time. We often say that this is a fact, this is a value. Actually, both of them are inextricably linked with each other. Facts are colored by values. Facts do not stand independent of values. They are bound to be affected by these values. So therefore, the very statement that we have a fact-value dichotomy has a problem as far as its configuration is concerned. So whether advertently or inadvertently, all theorists are bound to bring their values to bear in their analysis. So if I am trying to give an explanation, give a theoretical explanation, my explanation is bound to be affected or colored by my values, whether I like it or not. So therefore, if somebody on the other side is listening to those explanations, that person should also apply those filters and try to see how facts and values have got linked with each other in my explanation. So therefore, things should not be taken at their face value. We need to understand what lies beneath them, and that is what is being asked for here by Robert Cox. So therefore, he expects us to look closely at all analysis which claim to be objective and value-free. In other words, according to Robert Cox, no explanation, no theory can be absolutely, totally objective and value-free. So he therefore puts a question before prevailing theories, especially those of realism and neorealism, because they are the most prominent theories in international relations which are used to explain how things happen in the world or why things happen the way they are happening in the international political arena. And he further argues that these theories are always for those in the developed countries and the ruling elites in those countries. Meaning thereby that these theoretical explanations, some way or the other, go on to benefit the developed countries. Because it is the developed countries who have created these theories. So it is their theories, and it always goes on to benefit them. Benefit not directly materially, but the explanations are such in these theories which are the explanations which they would want to give to the world and which they would want us to understand. And of course, within those developed countries, the ruling elites are the most important beneficiaries of these explanations. So therefore, on the one hand, the claim of these theories is that they are objective, they are value-free, they are trying to explain to us certain things about international politics, but they have a certain objective, rather purpose, and they benefit those developed or powerful countries of the world. For example, when realism argues that this is how the world is, this is the structure of this world as neorealism would want us to believe. The structure of the world is anarchic, and in this anarchic structure, states behave the way they have to behave for survival in this anarchic situation. So they want us to believe, and we have come to believe, the inevitability of conflict, the inevitability of competition, the inevitability of strategic dilemma, and all those things, which are entrenched in our minds through these explanations, that these are the facts of international politics. But this is what is being questioned by Cox, that they are explanations by certain people who have a certain objective. And if we try to look at international politics maybe from a different perspective, we would come to realize that these are not inevitable facts in international politics, and there could be other things also happening, and things also could happen differently. Because when you look at things differently, you could see other ways as to how things can happen. If we have a certain mindset that conflict is inevitable in international politics, states eventually would act in the way that conflict framework wants them to act, and eventually they go on to conflict with each other. So our actions are determined by the thoughts, and our thoughts are determined by the entrenched values in the mind. And these values get entrenched in the mind through the dominant theoretical frameworks which are given to us by the dominant, by the strong, and by the ruling sections of society which are stationed in the West. They, according to Cox, do this to perpetuate the status quo, because the present situation, the status quo in the world, is to their advantage. And their basic intention is to ensure that the status quo does not change. Because if the status quo changes, maybe things would pan out in a manner which is not advantageous to them, which is not to their liking, which is not in their interest. So therefore, what they want is that they want to freeze time. They want to perpetuate the status quo and to make the present configuration of international relations appear to be natural and unchangeable. That is what I was explaining to you, that they want that this configuration, this nature, this structure of international politics as it is today is something, which has naturally come to us. There has been no human intervention from anyone, and it is something, which is final, which is unchangeable, and this is how the world will be. So that is, the kind of argument which comes to us by Western scholars also, by Western scholars who try to argue these things from different standpoints. But all those explanations are in some way or the other a defense of the status quo. And they also would like to coax other countries, to tell other countries that if they want to survive and be successful in the world, they have no option but to go on the line which has been drawn by them. So they are not forcing you to follow that line, but they are creating a situation when you have no option as a country but to toe that line. That is how consent is created at the international level. So therefore, Cox argues that when realists say that they are simply describing the world as it is, and this is how the world has been, and this is how it will be in the times to come. They are actually reinforcing the ruling hegemony. They are strengthening the ruling hegemony. They are consolidating the roots of the ruling hegemony. And they are trying to ensure that things do not change in any way and the present order remains entrenched for all times. Cox questions all these existing theories, which we have got. And he says that these are problem-solving theories, which actually accept the parameters of the present order and help legitimize an unjust and deeply unequal system. So, what he is basically trying to say that the effort is to entrench the existing order and to also legitimize it. And that takes a lot of effort because according to him, this is an unjust order. It is an unequal order because it has created an international system where countries are quite drastically unequal to each other. There are a lot of, disparities in the world, but through their theoretical explanations, these theories, these problem-solving theories help to legitimize these things as something which is natural, where no intervention has been done in the system and it is self-operating and so on. And therefore, he is for a critical theory. And he calls his own explanation as critical theory, and he says that the critical theory attempts to challenge the prevailing order. Because he says that what should be the task of theory? The task of theory should be to challenge the prevailing order and to seek to analyze it. And if there are problems in the existing order, if there are inequities, deeply rooted inequities and injustices, it should also assist in social change and emancipation of people at the larger level. So critical theory is something, which he says is the right theoretical framework, because it is not only trying to critically evaluate the existing order, but it is also trying to provide us a way out, how to go ahead, how to bring in change in the society, and how to lead to a situation where the people who are being rather dominated upon, who are being exploited, they get emancipated. And we live in a more equal and just international system. Further, Cox argues that hegemony for the dominant and the ruling state is important for maintaining stability and continuity, both at the domestic and international levels, because they want to maintain stability and continuity both at the national levels, at the domestic levels of countries, and at the international levels also. And all these levels, the forces of hegemony, they define and they rule. At the time when Britishers were ruling on India, we all used to talk about divide and rule, because that was the policy of the British imperial government anywhere in the world. But here, it is not divide and rule, it is define and rule. So what the hegemonic forces are doing, they are defining things to things which are atrocious, unjust, unequal. They are being defined as naive, as innocent, as sacred, as something which is inevitable, which is in everybody's interest. And therefore, by using these instruments, which are all sanctified, which are all made sacred, even they actually are not, it is easy for them to rule. So therefore, they define the terms and they define, what are the instruments in the society, and then use the same instruments to rule over us, to dominate over us. And by doing so, they create a broad consent for the order which they create, even among those people who are at the receiving end of that order. So first they create this order which is iniquitous, which is unjust, and then, as we have discussed earlier also, that they create a consent for that order. So therefore, Cox says that what we need, means we, the people who are at the receiving end of this domination and hegemony, what they need is to have alternative definitions to counter this hegemony. So they need their own language. The dominated need their own language. They need their own definitions. Because unless you have your own definition, you are using the definitions given by the exploiter. Until the time you use the language of the exploiter, you are wittingly or unwittingly being trapped in the game which has been structured by the exploiter in their own interest. So therefore, to get out of this vicious cycle, what we need is our own definitions to counter this hegemonic control which these forces are exercising over the teeming millions of the world. So therefore, he says that for the forces of capitalism, the hegemonic idea, the dominant hegemonic idea in the world today is free trade. And the idea underlying and undergirding is that it benefits all. So free trade is for the benefit of all globally. And the argument is, as it has come down to us from the times of Adam Smith and even today, that there is an invisible hand which controls the free trade. So there should be no state intervention, no international intervention of any other force in this free trade system. Because it is free, it is in everybody's interest, and everybody prospers as a consequence of that. But if we were to scratch this idea slightly and see the operationalization of this idea of free trade in the world, we realize how free it is. It is eventually creating a world which is highly unequal, where all the wealth gets concentrated in the core rich countries of the world, and the poor countries are getting increasingly impoverished. So the free trade is basically an idea which has been elevated to the level of global common sense. And the whole world today seems to be wedded to that idea, which apparently is so harmless and innocent. But at the operational level, when you see it, you find how cruel it is and how it is leading to creating a very unequal international system. And then he further argues that the degree to which a state, or the extent to which a state can successfully produce and reproduce its hegemony, is the indication of the extent of its power. So if in today's world if we want to measure the power which a hegemonic state has, we have to look at the control, or the extent to which it can produce and reproduce its hegemony. Because in today's world, if you look at the success of the US and its allies in gaining universal acceptability for neoliberalism, it shows the level of dominance and control that they exercise at the international system. So, if they were not so successful in gaining universal acceptability for this idea, they would probably not have been so dominant and so much in control as they actually are. So that is actually the measure of their success in controlling and hegemonizing at the international level. Further, Cox argues that despite the dominance of the present hegemon, he believes that capitalism is unstable and it is driven by contradictions. He ends with this note of optimism, whereby he is saying that capitalism, despite being so well entrenched, is unstable and it has got contradictions, and there would be economic crisis coming in inevitably, because that has happened in the past also, and those economic crises would be the catalyst for change, and that would lead to the creation of a counter hegemonic movement in the times to come. So here he takes recourse to Gramsci, when he discusses the possibility of such movements by saying that we need to combine the pessimism of intellect with the optimism of the will, a very famous sentence from Gramsci. After these, explanations of Robert Cox, in the next segment, we will be talking about the third important strand of Marxist theory, and that is critical theory. So, critical theory by itself is an independent strand, although Robert Cox would like to believe that his explanations also, which are a derivation from Gramscianism, also are critical theory. Because that also emerged from Marxist tradition, and critical theory also tries to answer this question, that why the optimism of an earlier generation was badly misplaced and no emancipatory transformation emerged on the European continent in the early part of the 20th century. So the concerns are similar, but critical theorists who are basically from Germany, they have given their own explanations. And in the next segment, we will delve deeply into how critical theory or critical theorists have given their own explanations about the international system and how they analyze it and what are their explanations and arguments in that context. Thank you.